Everybody, welcome to the August 21st, 2019 Village of Woodbury Planning Board meeting. I'd ask everybody to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Has the board had a chance to read the minutes from the August 7th meeting?
Yes.
Can I make a motion to accept the minutes as printed? We're gonna have them.
You're making a motion?
No, I asked for a motion. Rich makes, second.
I'll second.
Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right. First item on the agenda tonight, Hartman, public hearing for an ARB review of a proposed single-family dwelling within a development known as Woodbury Villas. Said property is located at 7 Alloway Cross and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 255, Block 1, Lot 7. Good evening. Good evening, sir. All right, just when you get set up, if you could state your name for the record and just a real quick overview of the project.
And, oh, here we go. Thank you.
There you go.
So I'm here to, I guess this is going to be like a public hearing.
Yes.
So here I am at the second meeting. A quick overview of the project. I mean, nothing has been changed since I was last here. I did provide the floor plans and the rear 3D that the board wanted to see. Additionally, the board asked me the next meeting to bring the samples and the materials. So I brought the siding and the how is it called? The shingles. So basically, this is the color that I have put on the application. This is the shake color, the brown, earth color, and this is the shingles colors that I've put on the application. It looks a little bit black from just the sample, but this is the actual picture.
Okay.
When you look at it at a bigger picture.
Now, when you say application, we don't have, do you remember filling out one of these forms? Because we were looking through the packet.
I did submit 12 of those.
Does anybody have it?
The ARB.
The ARB?
I have a copy just of it. So it says the certain deed, cedar impression rustic blend is for the siding,
Okay.
and the exact IKO crown style royal granite.
Oh, is that what she did? No. It's not on mine. Okay, you have it? Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'll give it back. I'll make a copy, give it back to you. Thank you. Sorry about that. All right, go ahead.
So that's the exact two samples. I mean,
Okay.
obviously the trim of the window is white, so I think
White is
I could bring her that.
Okay, good. All right, so, board, do you have questions for the applicant first, or you want me to go to the consultants? How do you guys want to work tonight?
Consultants.
Consultants?
Yes.
You can, if you just want to sit down for a few minutes, we're going to hear from our consultants, then we'll go out to the public, and then we'll go to the board for any questions.
Thank you.
No reason to make you stand the entire time. Mr. Dennis.
Okay, we're connected. All right, as the applicant said, you recently had a site visit. They have been on your agenda previously. You discussed this with them on July 17th and in the meeting in August. You had a site visit on August 1st. At that time, when you inspected the site, pretty much from the survey you could see it too, but visually you could see that the entire front of the property back to the front line of the proposed dwelling is a cleared area, and that's been cleared. The rest of the lot is pretty much wooded with secondary growth. There are various tree sizes from saplings up to maybe 10 or 12 inch. The applicant advised you that it was their intent to maintain the border with the adjacent property about 10 feet wide, maybe a little bit more, with the trees, but clear out the center section for both the home and for a yard area. In addition to that, they have provided you with floor plans, which you didn't have previously. And in your role as ARB, you are supposed to review similar, make sure that homes are not too similar or too dissimilar and that they fit into the neighborhood. You have an opinion that I gave you from Gary Thomasberger regarding that review. If you look at the floor plan that's now been provided, they have a first floor basement and they have a first floor, second floor. I don't know exactly how that works, but they show the floor plans there, and the first floor and second floor are fully developed areas within the building envelope, and they have an area of 4,852 square feet. The basement first floor shows 1,132 square feet, but it has a large unfinished area. It appears, looking at it, that it's equivalent to the first floor, second floor. And so if you add those two areas together, it would be 9,700 square feet. We don't have cubicle content here, so I think the closest comparison base that you have is square footage versus square footage. And even though it's unfinished, it is space within the building. So I can advise you that it appears from the floor plans they've submitted now, it's 9,700 square feet. In your role as ARB reviewing this similarity, I also provided you with a copy of what I have as all the dwelling units that were approved thus far in WP3. I sent that list to Gary Thomasberger. He reviewed that list, and you'll see also that he wrote an opinion that I gave to you as well, that he says that that list is complete, and that is the list of approved homes in WP3. Although, one caveat, he did say that some of the names of the dwelling styles have changed now because it's a new developer, but it's the same floor plan. So if you look at that list, you can see the range. I think it goes from about 1,298 square feet up to 3,700 square feet in dwelling sizes for square foot areas. This issue of cubicle content hasn't come up till recently when we started receiving buildings with large unfinished areas. So in the beginning, we only looked at square footages, and that's the only basis for comparison that I have now for you. But it does reflect on cubicle content, assuming that every square foot probably has a ceiling height of about 8 feet in the structure. Other than that, this is an ARB review. The building height, they've given you information on the building height. It's a complying 32 feet 6 1/4 for the maximum height. And quite frankly, your definition of height is a little different than that, so that would be complying for sure. And as far as the ARB form and colors, you have that with you now, and they have provided some color sheets for your review. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions of me.
Does anybody have any questions for Dennis?
Dennis, on. It's on. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. On the table, the square footage with or without basements? That's without, right?
Most of these are usable space. That's what we reviewed originally, and it was without basements, yes. It may, if there was a structure that came in that had a walkout basement, I can't tell you, it may have been included, but I think these were without basements.
Okay.
If it was an unfinished space with a basement, it wasn't used.
Okay. That's all I have.
For argument's sake, could you just multiply all these by 3? I mean, I know there's that, so the largest one is 3,750 square feet, plus or minus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
In general, those were first and second floors.
Oh, those are combined.
Those are first and second, yes, that was a combined, that was the square
All
footage
right,
of the
so
building.
even if you doubled that number, you're still well short of the 9,000 square.
Yeah, I don't think you'd double that number, no. The only thing that could possibly have happened with one of those is if they might have had a full basement, that would have been below grade. If they had a walkout basement, it probably would have been dealt differently. But
So
you'd have to go back and look at each model. I haven't gone back and looked.
This house would be the largest house built to date, though, wouldn't it?
Well, by the numbers, yes,
By the
that's
numbers,
clearly.
Is the original subdivision that was developed back in, did it have proposed building sizes on it?
2007, it was granted approval. The only thing on the plans at that time were some boxes just to represent locations, to show that driveways were reasonable into the properties and that sort of thing. There was no ARB approval until after the subdivision was approved and filed. Then they came in with different, you can see the first one that came in was July of 2007. And then that was the first one that was approved, and I think that was all the active adult area, which is where they started. Sales and that were not very successful, and they came back shortly, and they started with the unrestricted age areas. And so the second one was in, I think, March of 2010, so it was a while.
Yeah, and that one was 1,300 square feet.
It varied. They went from 1,300 square feet up to 2,700. That's in March, yeah.
First and second floor.
That would be first and second
Okay,
floor,
so
yeah.
this house is quite large. It's great. You guys are doing good. It's quite large. I don't know if we approve this house and then someone builds a house within 300 feet of it, that house wants to be 10,000 square feet. And then before you know it, we have 10,000 square foot homes next to each other.
I think this is where it runs, and I see Rick's grabbing the mic. I think that's where it runs to taking a look. I'm going to jump in before he gets his mic on. Where it might jump into look at that opinion from Gary regarding your obligations for review of dissimilarity.
Yeah, that's really your touchstone, is Gary's memo. And I think you ought to look at that carefully. The 300 feet is only for certain purposes. It's not simply if you don't find another home that large, or if you find a home that large in 300 feet, that gives you automatic right to go ahead and build one. It's more nuanced than that. It's more complicated than that. It's not just that 300 feet. It's really in the neighborhood. So it could be a much larger area of the WP3 that you're using as a comparator. And that's why the houses that Dennis is noted on his list is very relevant to your consideration as to whether or not this is dissimilar in connection with the neighborhood. But I think that you should look at Gary's memo. If people don't have it, let me know, and I'll recirculate that memo.
I read it like 5 times. So you just touched on something though. The scope, the comparative area can grow. It's not just within that 300 square feet.
That's
It's
300
more of it.
lineal feet, that's correct.
All right, so then that goes back to this house being dissimilar than the other houses.
Well, that's the determination that you have to make. It's whether or
Okay.
not this house is dissimilar, and one of the elements is what we wrestled with. I can't recall whether or not you were part of that. I think not. With another application as cubicle content and trying to compare visually as well as simply looking at square footage, whether or not it's dissimilar, right? So a house could be theoretically, square footage-wise, similar to something else, but the way that that house is structured makes it look very different. For instance, let's say we have a house like this that's fairly long in width, if that makes sense. It's fairly wide, let me put it. Whereas if you had a home 1/3 of that size, but went up, it might look very different as far as that it's not similar to all the others in there. And the same thing would be true for the reverse of that analysis. So you have to look at the home, and you can't just look at this home and look at square footage, although that's a very important aspect of this. But it's also looking at surrounding homes in the entirety of the neighborhood and see whether and how this fits in and whether it's similar or dissimilar. So I think you need more than what has been presented by the applicant for you to make an informed decision as to similarity, but that's really for the board to.
Thank you, that's a good point, thank you.
And when you're reviewing this, it's important to note that the list I provided is a comprehensive list. There are, I think, 60 or 70 homes in here that have been approved, different models, different sizes, different styles. So it's not so terribly restrictive to be somewhat in concert with the neighborhood.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, Dennis, any of the houses that are listed here include a finished basement?
I'll have to take a look. I'm not sure. I really couldn't tell you. I do see here that I gave some columns for photos, architectural elevations, floor plans, and renderings. As you got into the development, there was a lot more information that I have in my file in terms of elevations, renderings, floor plans. I'm not sure if we got all of that in the initial ones or if it's just missing from my files.
Now, if they finish their basements, they would have to get approval by the building department. Is that correct?
They should.
They should, yes. And so there would be some sort of statistics in the building department as far as the sizes of these houses with the finished basement?
I think Gary would have records of anything that came in for a building permit.
But we're also dealing with perhaps they didn't go through the right channels.
I wouldn't know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you just clarify you said the finished area is 4,852, is that correct?
Yes,
So
that's
that-
by their plan, yeah.
Is that, and looking at Gary's list, the largest house, so we're looking at a 40% increase? About
For those for those floors, yes, but there's more. I mean, by their calculations, if you ignore the finished space, all right, they would be 5,985 square feet. And if you add in the unfinished space, then it gets up to that number that I gave you of 9,700 square feet.
So, again, if we will go ahead with this, I'm not sure what we've done in the past when we approve, or do we approve square footage? How do we mention that we're only approving the finished area at a certain amount? Anything else must go to the building inspector. Do we ever state that?
That's not the issue. I think the issue is, the only reason we're giving you the larger ones is so that you can get a visualization of the cubicle content of the building, so that you might be able to compare it to the other buildings around there from their mass and from their size, which is part of your responsibility. So it's not a matter of telling them to finish or not to finish the interior space. Once you build a building, that will be, the cubicle content of that building will be that size, unless they add on to the building. But that is the mass that they're asking you to
Yeah,
approve.
but I'm just saying, whether we say it's similar or dissimilar, if for some reason we say it's dissimilar because of the mass size, how do we quantify the mass size? Is it a percentage based on what Gary submitted? What is it based on? If we were to put a criteria, in other words, 30%, 40%, or 4,000 square feet, do we ever say that?
Well, I think that's within the board's authority.
Yeah.
But I'll defer to Rick if he has
Yeah,
anything
because-
else. But I think that's within your discretion. That's what the code says, and that's what I think his opinion says.
Yeah, because I'd like to say, if we say it's dissimilar because of the mass size, and it's 30 or 40% based upon what he submitted, or if we approve it, I want to say we're only approving the finished area, not the unfinished area. But you're saying we don't normally say that as a condition. Is that correct?
What you did in connection with the Weiss approval for Apple Hill, we included a specific condition in there that there shall be no additions, expansions, or alterations to this structure without returning to the planning board for consideration of an amended approval.
Thank you.
And
That's
that was without a finished, that was with a
Yeah.
unfinished.
That's good,
basement.
does that apply for interior, or is it just exterior?
The way this is written is very broad and includes alterations.
Okay,
So
And we
alterations
had
to
the
me would
plan.
include interior.
So that would say that includes interior.
The purpose of that specific condition was similar to the discussion we're having now, is that what happens if you approve a certain size under an ARB approval, and then they go and ask for more from a mere building permit, in which it won't go through the same type of analysis. And so therefore, we added as a specific condition that they couldn't do that without coming back, similar to site plans, where if you want to change your site plan, you have to have an amended approval. And so that's what you have done in the last one, so that, as you recall, you ended up with a structure that was smaller than was originally proposed. And in order for that not to be expanded later on without analysis and your approval, you put this condition in there.
Okay.
Do we have any? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I know you didn't ask us for a report on this particular one, but I feel like maybe I could just throw this into the mix. I wouldn't focus too heavily on, when you're comparing the houses, how much of the inside is finished, because I think the whole purpose of the ARB and all of these codes is the experience of the visual impact of the house from the outside of the house as you move through the neighborhood. And if you had a 10,000 square foot house with 5,000 square feet finished, and then later on you finish off more of it, you finish off another 2,000 square feet, it's still gonna look the same on the outside. You don't really have a different experience or impact on the neighborhood as you finish off the inside of the building. The impact on the neighborhood happens when the building is constructed and there's a frame and a shell that has an impact. You might be tremendously impacted by the appearance of the building and never go inside it.
So that holds true if they didn't add windows or cupolas or skylights or,
Well,
or
those are
something of that
things-
nature, right?
Those would be experienced from the
Outside.
neighborhood, from the outside. So I would focus, when you're looking at, is something dissimilar or similar or excessively dissimilar, it's really how it looks from the outside that matters. It doesn't make sense that the house isn't big until you finish off the basement. Because it's really a matter of the impact, visual impact on the community and on the community character of the neighborhood.
Thank you, Jonathan.
But again, going back, I really think, and the code is interpreted by Gary. Gary has given a very comprehensive review of how this board should look at the issue of dissimilarity. And I think you need to use that to really guide you.
I'll come back to the board. Let me go out to the public right now. Anybody in the first row? Nobody ever sits in the first row. Everybody's so scared. Anybody in the second row? Just state your name prior to.
Good evening, Joe Zlotta, Central Valley. I just have a few observations and comments regarding the application. Some of these Mr. Golden and Mr. Lindsay already touched on. First off, the board has approved multiple models for this development over the past 12 years. Many of these were approved with multiple elevations. The overall design of this particular model is, in my opinion, unlike all of the homes that are currently under construction or have been constructed. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that the proposal for close to a 6,000 square foot home, again without the unfinished area, will make this the largest home in the development, surpassing the largest that's currently there. And I'm going to disagree with Mr. Lindsay on this by about 1,000 square feet. I believe the home up on, I believe it's Catskill High Rail, is in the neighborhood of about 4,900 square feet. That is yet to be completed. If the board does see fit in approving this application, and I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, it will set a precedent and it will establish a new upper limit as to what future homeowners can request. Having said that, and again, I'm going to touch on something that Mr. Golden had mentioned. I would request that certain conditions be placed on the approval. First and foremost, that the approval be site-specific. Since it is the landowner and not the developer seeking the approval, I would request that this model not be placed into the general inventory of approved models, and that any future builder looking to construct the same style home be required to appear before this board. I would also request, and again, I think this was something that was touched on, that changes to the approved design of the home prior to and during construction require an amended approval from this board. Additionally, I believe a condition should be placed on any approval requiring that future changes to the home or its design following the issuance of a certificate of occupancy that results in the overall footprint of the home or the amount of living space in the home being increased require approval from this board. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anybody else in the second row wants to have any comments on this application? Third row on the application? Anybody sitting along the outside? Anybody at all in the room have any comments on this application? Okay. I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so passed. Does the board, we've heard from our consultants, we've heard from the public. Does the board tonight feel they have enough information to discuss and potentially come up with a resolution on the applications in front of us this evening? We'll go down to, I started on the end, sorry, not putting you on the spot, but
All right.
we'll work our way down the line.
I would like to see some sort of modification in the plan to reduce the size, some sort of compromise in a sense. As it is, to me, it's dissimilar to the other houses that are there as far as pure size of the structure.
So you'd like to see an alternative?
Yes,
Presented.
I would.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm gonna build on that. I'd like to see an alternative compared to other homes in the area and see what we can do to make it more in line. So,
Okay, Sandy? Thinking?
Well, I have my thoughts on it, that, Rick, you had said that you felt that we needed more information. Were you leaning towards cubicle content, or?
Well, it's really, what I was saying is that really to date, you have this rendering right here, and you have a chart concerning square footage
Right.
of other areas. One of the things that you did in a prior application, Weiss, was get more information on the look of surrounding homes in that area to assist you in making your determination with respect to similarity/dissimilarity. I haven't seen that with this application, so I was suggesting as to whether or not you needed additional information so that you could make your decision on whether or not this was similar or dissimilar to existing neighborhood conditions.
Okay.
So that's why I was raising it, as to whether or not you wanted more information so that you could make that determination.
Okay, because I know for the Weiss application, we did ask for, the applicant to provide us with a chart that compared the cubicle content of the homes surrounding it. And I think that would be, that would be a good comparison for us to review as well.
Well, I agree. I think cubicle content would be nice to see. I think when we were up there at the site visit, if looking at the lot, there's no house to the left, there's no house to the right. I think there's only one house diagonal that has been built, and that is one of the houses that are off the approved, and I didn't forget you, so don't think I didn't forget you, that is off the approved list. It's one of
The one on Hudson?
No, it's on, if you're standing in the applicant's lot and you kind of like look
To the right.
Left. Yeah.
Oh, to the left.
You stand in the lot, looking to the street, there's one house to the left.
Okay.
I don't remember if there was a house down to the right or not. Right, I think it was like one or two houses.
But we can go beyond that, though.
We can, but specifically, for, I think for Weiss, we kind of concentrated in what was on that corridor where they were being built.
And Weiss was, I mean, that application was a built out, almost a fully
There were
built
three
out
more, yeah.
subdivision. This, we still, you know, it's a lot of vacant lots there.
One of the things that Gary says in his memo, when talking about looking at the area to determine the similarity, he says that the 300 feet is only relevant if you're actually going to disapprove something.
Right.
And it says that a clearly stated purpose is to ensure the ARB's review prevents, among other things, excessive dissimilarity and inappropriateness of the exterior appearance of buildings in a neighborhood, because both the immediate area within the neighborhood and the neighboring areas to that neighborhood will be adversely affected by such dissimilarity and appropriateness, including improved and unimproved property. So it's, Gary has said you have to look at not just the immediate area, certainly not just 300 feet, but not even just the immediate area, but the neighboring areas as well in making your determination of dissimilarity.
I don't want to cut you off, so go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow colleagues here that the mass size is very large. I'd like to see something smaller. And in all fairness to the applicant, Dennis, you said, looking at the unfinished and finished, you said, was it 9,700?
If you add,
If you add the upstairs and the downstairs?
it appears that.
Potential. I call it potential. So in all fairness to the applicant, I think if we're gonna come back and ask him for something smaller, we should give him, you know,
Parameters.
Yes.
an idea. Are we looking at 20% larger, 25% larger than the current existing home in the entire development? Yeah, just give him an idea, what are we looking for, so he doesn't have to come back 2 or 3 times to the board. But again, you know, if I look at this, there is a potential, if he does finish it. I mean, you know, it's very big. I mean, 9,700 is, to me, 3 times the size of, would be almost 3 times the size of anything that I've seen or on Gary's list. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a tough comparison, because
Yeah.
like I said, I'll try to find the floor plans that I have with others. I'm not sure if they had any basements or not. I'll take a look. Some people try to work on that plan so you have a better basis for comparison. But I think, no matter the way I look at this, however, this looks like it's going to be the largest one. It's going to be trusted.
Now, I'd like to take a step back with the board. Now, everybody's talking about overall size. Now, are we okay with the style? Because this is a completely different style of house than that is up in that development. Most of the houses up there are, for lack of a better word, boxes. You know, they have some architectural design to it, but they're pretty much square boxes.
Well, that's where I would ask, what was the original site plan look like? Maybe a site map that shows the previously approved site plans, boxes, this box, and then what the models were, you know, like 4 or 5 different options of what the models were that were previously approved, and how this particular one meets the ARB standards. I don't think it's up to us to design the home. It's their home. They need to be happy with it, but it needs to be in line with what was previously approved.
Realize how this process normally happens, it certainly happened in this case, is that an applicant comes in for WP3. They came in and said, all right, we have, I forget how many, there was a number. No, but I mean the number of different styles. The applicant just said, these are the styles that we'd like. And the board said, those are fine. I don't think it was ever intended that that was the exclusive list of the type of styles.
Right.
If the applicant would have done 5 more in different styles, the board would have looked at that and determined whether or not it was appropriate. I don't think that all of those styles sort of fit into a particular category. So
Well, how do we need to compare the exterior of the building to see if it's similar or dissimilar?
I
Need
think
other
what
exteriors.
Chris was saying, I think is the right way to approach it, is that this is different from the ones that have been previously approved. But is that difference something that is a distinction that needs to be warranted an approval or a denial. That is, if this is different, but if you don't have a problem with this difference, then you can approve it. If this house was looked like the Guggenheim Museum, right, and you thought that that was just too similar in design generally from the others, that would be like an extreme example, obviously. But it's looking at the design consistent with the others that have been approved, but I don't think it has to fit into the class of the others approved is really what I'm trying to get at.
It has to fit with the overall development, style, look, and feel of the neighborhood. And it's not on the applicant to come back with and give us a map and plot out all 451, locations and say, these are the types of homes that were put there. What I would suggest is maybe, get some time, drive up to the neighborhood, kind of get a feel for what it looks like. The board is sitting here potentially asking the applicant to come back with another design. I'm trying to fish out everybody. If we're asking him to come back with another design because we're not happy with what's been presented in front of us, we have to give this applicant some sort of guidance. Cut it down 10%, cut it down 20%. We don't. What is this? This is a ranch, right?
It's a raised ranch.
Raised ranch. Are we okay in general with the raised ranch, or are we to tell the applicant cut it down 20%, and then when he comes back and be like, oh, it's a raised ranch, we don't like raised ranches, or we don't think a raised ranch is going to fit in that neighborhood. So that's what we have to do tonight, and that's what we have to give back, and that's what we owe this applicant, that we have to give him the proper guidance so that when he comes back to us with another set of drawings and a rendering, everybody, the gentleman can build a home that will suit his family, it fits into the neighborhood, and that this board is happy that we're not, and I'll use an extreme example, he's not putting a castle with turrets, and a moat in a neighborhood, kind of. I know it's very extreme, but that's what we're here to make.
Or the castle moat.
Right, that's what we're here to make sure is doing. And that's what we want to do tonight. We want to give the applicant some guidance, so, when you come back to us, because as you can see where the board is going, it seems like, and again, I'm not trying to speak for anybody, is everybody okay with the style, not the size, the style of the home?
I'm fine with the style. I think it's very attractive. It just has to be reduced as far as size.
I will agree with you too. I think this home itself is an attractive home. It's a nice style home. I would agree that size-wise, I think we need to come down a little bit. Now, you brought up a very good point. Do we say 10% over the largest square footage size that we have on record with the building department? 15%, that's what we now need to decide on next year, and to give the guidance back to the applicant so they can represent to us.
Well, with the Apple Hill application, that was a larger house. I think we used, 13%? Did we use 13% in the largest?
We may have come to 13%, actually, or may have said 13%.
We backed into
And you
it,
have
I
to
think.
be careful about just saying, all right,
Percent.
we think 13% increases are fine, and then each one can increase 13%. I don't think you ought to look at it that mathematically. I think it's more organic as to whether or not you believe this home and this size is something that is dissimilar to the extent that you want to reduce it so that it's similar, not reduce it for reducing it.
So we have to define the word similar. Is that what we're
You
doing?
have to consider that it's not excessively dissimilar. Lawyers like to speak in double negatives. So it should be similar to a degree to what is there as far as the cubicle content, square footage, and the other elements that are thrown into the mix.
Gary talks about the appropriateness of it fitting.
Similar. It's got to be similar. That's the word.
Yeah, it's similar is a broad definition.
So what do you think, Chris? And we have to come up with an answer now?
We have what?
Well,
Let's come up with
if
an
we're
answer.
asking the applicant to come back, we
Yeah.
should be giving him some kind of parameters
This
to
may,
come back to
this
us.
may help you with that.
All right.
Under the present law in Woodbury, although we're going to be suggesting that it be changed, is on ARB decisions like this, it's required that you make your determination either at the close of the public hearing, which would be right now, or at a date that you set in the future. Right? So you have to set a reasonable date in the future for you to make a decision. I think if you don't feel like you have enough information, you can ask for more information, take that into consideration, set a date that you're going to make a decision, have the information ahead to you far enough in advance and then make that. That's what happened with your other application as well.
Right, and asking the applicant to come back with an alternate design is considered that request for additional information, right? That satisfies that. Okay.
So was it a mistake to close the public hearing for that matter, or should it have been left open?
No.
No, I think it's actually quite appropriate to close the
Okay.
public hearing. The public hearing is to get comment on this to help inform your decision.
All right.
You received a comment, and it's not really appropriate to hold a public hearing open just so that you don't trigger some other
Okay.
ending. Right? So I think what you did was the appropriate way to do it.
So now we're in a conundrum. Not really.
Well, I think we have to keep it.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Please.
Please.
Regarding the square footage, I think the 3,700, I remember last time, Chris, you had a list that had 4,900.
Yes.
So, I mean, 37, it's 4,900. On top of that, that 4,900 is without the basement. So, if you look at that 4,900 and you compare it with the basement to mine, it'll be extremely close. I mean, the 3,700 list, I just printed out from public records. One of the neighboring houses that was built, from the tax records, it also gives me 4,513. That's without the basement and without the garage. So that 37, I mean, it may sound extremely big, and it sounded like 9,000 versus 3,700. But if you accurately look at it, if you look at that, for example, the 4,900 square foot house that is built, I don't know why it's not on the list. And I think the 4,900 is a house that has already a C of O. That was the list that has already a C of O. And you look at the 4,900 with the basement, it wouldn't have looked so dramatic. That's as far as square footage. Also, the design is a big portion of it. I mean, after all, somebody passing this house is not gonna see the square footage. It's not gonna be written on the house. We did a lot of design features that it should look smaller than a lot of the houses that are built over there. If you remember well, we just hit completely the entire second floor. And that's exactly what the people are gonna see when they drive by. And when I looked at actually from the Village of Woodbury zoning, it says, the reason to disapprove would be, in quote, that the building for which the permit was applied would, if erected, be so detrimental to the desirability of property values or development of the surrounding area as to provoke one or more of the harmful effects. Again, I don't think, I looked at it before we designed the house, I looked at the surrounding houses, and if we would look deeper into it, it would not be that different. About the cubic content, I would go for a cubic content. I believe if I do a cubic content compared to that house, I believe I would actually be way less, since all the houses, they have bonus rooms above the garages, they have a lot of spaces. The square footage of this house includes all of that. For example, if you look at the floor plan, the room above the garage is actually part of the square footage. It's not, there's square footage, then there's the bonus rooms above the garage. If you look at it, you'll actually see that's part of the square footage. There's no hidden spaces. So if cubicle content is something, I believe I would come back. This house is gonna be way less. Regarding the basement,
Could I interrupt you for just a second? Because you keep referring back to this one comparator home that you say is 4,900 square feet without counting the basement and without counting the garage. Where is that located so that we can see whether or not?
I don't know.
It's the Catskill, it's the Pomona house.
What?
The Pomona Enterprises.
Pomona.
It's 255-3-9. And the building permit for that was issued at 4,920 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, 2.5. 3 full baths, 2.5 baths. 3 full, 2 half baths. Wow, that was hard to say.
And what was the square footage?
4,920. And there's also, and see, this is
the ARB was for 4,929?
That application did not come in front of this board.
Well, it did come in front of this board and
Was
it
never
was
approved or
much
disapproved.
larger.
Well,
and then they
that's what I
didn't come
wanted,
back.
that's what I was getting at, is that with respect to homes and comparators, they're comparators for what this board has approved, right? It's not something that somebody built contrary to what was approved here.
Correct,
So
but
that's what we have to look at. So we'll look at Pomona and see what, if anything, was approved with respect to Pomona.
I mean, I'm not only talking about Pomona. I wasn't sure where that house was. I mean, you just said that it was 49. I'm looking, for example, at one another house that I just printed out of the tax records. It was completed actually 2012 or 13, which means it's there for a long time.
What is the location of that home?
3 Patterson Pass.
3 Patterson?
Patterson Pass.
Thank you.
And what was the square footage of it?
If you take a look, this is just printed out of the public records. It gives you 4,513, just first floor plus second floor. Then it has 862 square feet of covered patios and decks and things like that. And additionally, it has a garage and it has a basement. So if you look at that house, and that has a walkout basement.
Yep. I think you lost the mic.
Yeah. Oh, you died.
Okay, we can hear you.
If you look at that house and you compare it, I don't think it will be so off. And again, I don't know what the board is, I mean, this is there for life.
Okay, can I just add something, because
Yeah.
this Pomona house is, something rather central. At least under my notes, that was never approved for ARB by this board.
It was not.
Okay.
None of
So
the houses on
that's not a
that list.
comparison. Whether or not something was, whether or not something was built that may not be consistent with an ARB approval that it was supposed to have, that's not something that can be used as a comparative. What we're talking about is for this board and what it's approved and the similarity or dissimilarity with respect to that. That's what's, because you're before this board now, and you're asking this board to approve, and they're looking at it in the context of what they believe to be similar and dissimilar in their ARB approvals.
Correct, but again, I'm looking at another one, Madison, that's there for, I think that was approved by the planning board.
I don't know, I'd have to look at it.
It's okay, in the village of Woodbury zoning, it says that it will provoke, the area and make it less inhabitable. I mean, in that fact, if it wasn't approved, it wasn't approved. If you have houses around it, and especially if you have houses that's been there for so long, that are way bigger, I don't think, if you look at similarity, after all, the square footage was never set a limit on the square footage. It was always to look similar or this looks similar. As I said, if you have a house or 2 or 4 or 6 that is more than 37 hours, especially in the high end, this subdivision is divided into 3 sections. The middle end, the high end is with the lots, with the houses. And if probably most of the houses over there more than 37 hours. It would not provoke a disadvantage of the property. I know it's crucial, so not. But if you look at it similar, it's there, it's around you.
Well, if it's there and it didn't receive the proper approvals, then that's not a proper comparison.
Even if most of it, if you look at it similar to your neighbors.
But if your neighbor did not receive the right approval, that's not, you can't consider that. What you have to consider is that something that received the proper approvals. And simply because it received a building permit does not mean that it received the proper approvals. Usually does, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee. You'd have to look at each individual circumstance.
I think everybody here on the board thinks that the house is too big. And that's so that we have to figure out what the best path is to move to the next level. And it's not unusual for an applicant to come and have to redesign it.
I have no problem. I was just trying to point out.
No, that's good.
Information in looks, I mean, to me, it looks, wow. But
Right.
Right.
That's not exactly. Because the 37 was without a basement. This is 9,000 without a basement. Honestly, I have no problem taking over the basement. It's a unfinished basement. Has no windows in the front.
Right.
I mean, what do I have on it? Nothing.
Right.
So what,
The number look like.
well, we're working off of what our consultants are giving us, and
Correct.
that's based.
That's why it was.
No, and it's fair, but we have,
Trying to point out that it made it look way.
Yes. Right. Yep.
When you take the house, you know, this with the basement, this without the basement. Particularly most of the houses up there has a walkout basement because they're built on a slope. This is a flat, doesn't have a walkout basement.
So-
And if I remove the basement, it makes it less than a 6,000 square foot. I would do that, that would be a problem. Not that it hurts that it has the basement, but it just made it look like when you counted an unfinished basement, that it's probably half completely buried in the front. Only half right there.
Okay. So I think,
In the way of additional information, I don't know if the board's going to give you a reduction or anything like that, but whatever comes back, there's no dimensions on here for the width of the building or the depth of the building, because putting everything else aside, if you had the width of the building, you could look at it on the lot in terms of how do the other houses sit on the lots, what's their width. You get a feel for its comparison to the other buildings in the neighborhood without going inside and without getting square footages, because it looks like a fairly wide structure, and that's what you would see from the roadway. So whether it's this structure or whether it's another structure that you reduce, if you can give us the width on the building, I think that would be helpful.
I'll do that.
okay.
I'll do that.
Well, the dimensions, the width, yeah.
I'll do that, and if, again, if the board wants to see that, I'm ready to, prepare it, submit a little bit smaller, and actually compare it to dimensions,
With the overall dimensions, cubical content,
I'm ready to invest and, actually take a similar house, I'll take even not something that's smaller, because that is a recent house, I'll take something that's there at least 3-4 years. And compare it, cubic content, I believe this is gonna come out less than those houses, because I've seen those houses, and they all have those cornerstones, they all have those, because they're 2 stories, they have a lot of atrium between spaces, it's just a flat, it doesn't have those huge staircases, things like that, open the valves, those kind of things. So, again, and after all the cubic content, so the people can see, they're not gonna see numbers. So, if the board is set, that will be helpful.
I believe it will be.
But now what are we doing on the size? Are we asking for an alternative on the size?
I believe the applicant already agreed that he would take out or come back with a smaller footprint building.
But like
small-
Rich said, are we putting a parameter on that? Are we saying how small it needs to be?
Well, I think there's just some questions floating because we seem to have properties that did not go through this board that seem to be larger in size. So I think we need to confirm those properties if they were actually approved through the ARB process or they were just issued building permits, because that's going to weigh in on this overall size of the building, right? That we're comparing it to. So I think it's hard right now for this board to give a size to the applicant unless we turn around and say it has to stick within one of the dwelling size that is currently on the approved ARB sheets, which at this point would be 3,700 square feet. The Mansfield 2, I believe, is the largest.
3,700 plus a basement, though, it'd be more like 60 or 7,000 square feet, right?
It would be, and I believe, and
In the garage. So, I mean, it still feels about 1,000 square feet heavy in the world of things.
I mean, well, as far as, I don't know, can I ask a question? Square content, is that anything above the grade level up?
Cubical content?
cubical content.
Cubic content.
I would have to go back and take a look at these models. This didn't become an issue until recently when we started getting structures in that had huge areas that were shown as unfinished. And it wasn't only on the basement level, it was on upper levels, and that's when it came about that maybe we better be looking at the cubicle content more so the board could get a feel for what Jonathan talked about too, the appearance from the roadway and the exterior of the building. And so that came into vogue more. I don't recall it at all coming up in these because I think they were basically built out on the first and second floors. Some of them may have had basements and some may not have. I'd have to look back at the floor.
You count, none of this dwelling, when you have an office that you count, and it means, let's say, if you have a basement, then it's part of anything above the ground, that you can see, including the angles and the attic as well, correct?
I think we would look at cubicle content as anything above grade, yes.
Anything above it.
And then if the backyard slopes away and there's a,
Correct,
you know,
it's the average.
it depends if that's visible too, the board would have to consider.
Was that a Gary question, or is that?
Sorry?
Never mind. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
I have a question for you. If I do take, and I'm not gonna take it home, because that's something that wasn't important. I'm gonna take something that is there for a while. And I do come back and I do the calculations, the rest of the calculations, and build them out exactly, and take the overall square content. And it does come back smaller, extremely similar, which means within the 2 degrees that difference. Is that something that the board consider that just the board consider?
I think one of the things that's important, you know, you're saying that I'll pick one that's been there for a while,
It needs to be more.
but if it's been there for a while and it's something that was approved for a certain size and then they put additions on it, that's not consistent with what this board had approved. So I think what's necessary is for you to pick things that have been approved by this board and determine and make your comparisons against that.
Question is the street palace and palace. The one I just randomly took, not randomly, but it was looked to me like a big house. In fact, it's 96 feet wide, so based on the tax records. And in fact, there was street palace and palace, something that was approved.
I think you'd have to
We'd have
find
to
out from
look at-
Gary.
What? Say that again?
Wouldn't he have to find out from Gary for 3 Patterson Pass if that had an ARB?
ARB approval and look at the approval that was given.
Correct.
Not just going out there and deciding based upon tax records, because if those tax records include additions that were in excess of what was approved by the ARB, that's different.
Yeah. this
Right.
is-
That house does not have any issues.
All I'm saying is that you need, if you don't want to have to come back and forth, what I'm suggesting is that you look at whatever you want to use as comparators, that you look in ask the building department for that file, look in the ARB resolution, and see what was approved there for that particular home.
Take a look at it. I don't think any particular lot came from the ARB, it was just a bunch of models. I looked at the minutes way back.
The initial ones were models that were approved, but those had,
It wasn't for a specific lot.
no, but they all of those had square footages attached to them.
I'll take a look at that one, if you guys pass again. And if, so that was just my question. If it was something that was approved by the board, and due to the cubicle content comparison, it does come back that it's extremely similar, which means within 2%. If the board was still required to use this one, because again, as I said, people with cubicle content have extremely big advantage, because square footage wise, they have bonus rooms, they have all of that. My square footage includes all of that, which means I've used up every little space, which means this room has an angled ceiling, which actually used up an attic a bit. And that's why it doesn't look like they go from 9,000 square foot up. It's basically most of it in the basement, some of it in the attic, and then you have just this one story. You know, that's why, I mean, I believe the cubicle content will show that the real design fit.
Well, cubicle content is certainly one of the issues that is to be considered by the board. It's not the sole issue, but it's an issue that the board can consider.
But the dimensions will also help, because you're saying all the square footage is included, but it may actually be pushing the house out scale-wise. So I think comparisons would be what we need. We need more comparisons and smaller in nature.
I'll make this smaller than them. Yeah, I'll show that
Thank you.
comparison.
Okay.
And I believe I will be smaller than.
Even better.
A lot of those houses.
If you're smaller than one previously approved, then you're golden.
Well, he has, speak for yourself. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a
Good.
request from Dennis, if the board approves. Rick, you made a statement, I'm a little confused. I've been on the board 12 years. We approve subdivisions, we approve styles, models, the size of these?
Well, the sizes are noted.
Yeah,
on
the size.
yeah.
And if a person wants to build a much larger home than what we approve in the subdivision, I'm not talking about the unfinished area, the basement, I'm talking about the size of the home, like, I'll throw a number, 3,800 square feet. How do these homes get approved without coming back to the board? And again, I'm not talking about the basement, I'm talking about the base house.
If Gary believes that it's within his jurisdiction to issue a building permit.
So that's something new to me. I'm learning after 12 years that if we approve subdivision and the size of homes, and Gary, if an applicant wants to increase the size of the model by 1,000, 2,000 square feet, that is within his jurisdiction?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, that's what I'm having a hard time understanding.
Right, because it's not that simple. It's whether or not, if Gary's issued a building permit for a particular building, there may be reasons why he has done so that may not be in exact conformance with the model that was approved.
By the
right?
planning board.
By the planning board. And so you need to look at each one of those and see what was the reason that Gary issued a permit for a particular structure that may vary somewhat from what the planning board is, and he will do that. And he also has in the past issued building permits for additions onto approvals that this board has granted without the
Yeah,
application coming back before.
that's different. I'm just talking about when you're building the home for the first time, not if you're building an addition on the home. I'm just curious how that process works. And again, the applicant mentioned two homes here, the Pomona House and the Patterson. I'd like to know a little more about how those houses got approved
I think
to that.
what you need to do then is talk to Gary.
Yeah, I don't think, because right now, unfortunately, I don't think it's a matter for this board to take up. We have to look at what was approved by ARB, what's in
Yeah.
ARB, and move on from there. If other houses got approved without going through this board, we have to speak to Gary and
Yeah.
figure out where the breakdown
That deals
there was.
with Gary's jurisdiction.
Okay.
But Chris is absolutely right. I think yours is not to determine whether or not something got built that wasn't approved by you, for whatever reason. Your ARB decision here and your ARB decisions and prior ones ought to be consistent with respect to your ARB criteria that you're gauging and move on from there.
Okay.
I just want to, clarify about that, it's the one that was approved. Just a look at section 8.5, 8.5 from the village zoning, which talks about the ridge preservation. I don't see anything that when it talks about similarity, if it looks at something that was approved, it talks about the neighborhood, it never ever mentions anything once compared to what it was approved. But it doesn't mention it probably 4 or 5 times compared to the neighborhood. Just remind it.
What the courts have said, that if there's an approval by a particular board, and then there is a permit that is issued contrary to that approval, that does not mean that you have a right to that permitted approval by, say, a building inspector. That your right was the right that you had in the approval from this board.
Correct, but we're looking at similar,
You-
and the ridge preservation, it does only mention the neighborhood. Again, at Dallas.
I've given you my answer.
There's ridge preservation and there's ARB. There's two different criteria the board's looking at.
Correct, but the ARB is to look if it's similar, dissimilar, if it's similar to, again,
And what I'm advising the board is that they ought not to consider homes that were not built in accordance with the ARB approval as being comparators. That it has to be comparing to things that they approved.
again, I'll take a look. Looks to me like the comparison is something that was approved. And I'll-
It may be, I don't know. You may be correct on that.
And I'll go by similar to something that was approved. But I'm just mentioning here, just reading it now, that the home knows about it. It doesn't.
I know that. But that's a neighborhood that is built with approved structures.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Wait, before we...
We gotta set dates, don't we?
So if, you're expecting the applicant to give you some additional information. I think for them to give you additional information for you to look at it, I think would not fit with your September 4th meeting, unless it was given tomorrow.
No, I was gonna suggest is, would the applicant be able to have it in by the 4th so we can get it
On
on
the 18th.
the 18th? Would you be able to do that? And then we can get you on the meeting for the 18th? Sure. Okay. Thank you, sir, for your time tonight. The next one's the 4th, so you have to have your submittals in prior to the 4th so that you can appear on the 18th. Yeah, I gotta go. Okay. Just a little change in the agenda tonight. We're going to go to Schlesinger first. Discuss and reviews revised 3-lot subdivision located off Susquehanna Trail and Scudamock Road in Highland Mills. Said property is known as the Village of Woodbury Tax Map Sections 204, Block 1, Lot 3.
It is cold in here. I'm like,
When you're ready, sir, just state your name for the record and just a brief overview of what you're in front of the board for tonight.
Hi, good evening, David Higgins, from White Kelly Engineering and Surveying. The application is Packard, it's a 3-lot subdivision. Existing parcel is approximately 138 acres in size. It's located on Scudamock Road, part of the property is on the north side of the road, part is on the south side. And it's also bordered on the east by Sequoia Trail. I had appeared before this board, I think it was about a year ago. Since that time, we have completed the soil test for each of the 3 lots proposed. We had Gary Comerford with the soil test that he required. Designed septic systems, the layout for the wells, the driveways, the septic systems for that. And updated the zoning, bulk zoning table to address some prior comments that Mr. Lindsay had on his prior review. So we are presenting this for preliminary approval.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Mr. Lindsay, go to you.
Okay. Well, Dave's laid out the history of this application. It's a very large lot. There are requirements for net lot area. They should comply simply to show that they can. I don't think there's any question but that they will, but there's certain deductions that have to take place. But I think they'll end up with complying lots nonetheless. There was also a request by the board that the table of area that they have include the property in South Blooming Grove. I don't think that was done yet, so, and I know that they've explained previously that the lot line over there is a little difficult to establish, and so the areas will be plus or minus a little bit. I think it's defined as running along the ridge line or something like that for the property line, so it gets a little difficult, I assume, to define.
Yes, what Dennis is referring to is that when they created the village of Woodbury, the line was created, it basically went through a portion of the property, and it created portions of the land, 3 lots actually, that are located in the village of South Blooming Grove, separate from what we have shown here in the village of Woodbury. From what I understand, speaking to my surveyors, they've spoken with the surveyors from the county. The county is aware of some issues with this general property line and split off those properties as well as some others along the boundary. They're working right now, the county's working to resolve exactly where that line's gonna be. So that line actually is likely going to be shifting one way or another. Where exactly it lines up, we don't know. But we're right now showing that the perimeter of the property based on the deed, which again covers the 138 acres that goes across that.
Okay.
Hasn't changed.
And the board, well, anyway, the board asked for the areas and do the best you can and provide those on the drawing. As far as utilities are concerned, they're on-site septics. We made a few comments on the on-site septic system, but they had successful testing. And these lots are large enough, and it looks like they have identified areas that'll be suitable for wastewater. As far as water supply, they'll need to drill wells, and you typically allow them to go to a certain point in the review process before they have to invest the money in drilling a well. But they do have to demonstrate adequate water supply prior to finalizing these and filing the map. As far as stormwater management, we've made a few comments on stormwater management in terms of how to handle the runoff, but it looks like there's ample opportunity for these lots to absorb the water that might run off from the new impervious areas. On landscaping, you have a requirement for shade trees, but you have allowed applicants that are careful in their clearing of the lots and maintaining tree lines along roadways to waive to allow those existing trees, if they're substantial, to serve the purpose of the shade trees. There's no reason to plant a tree in front of a forest and call it a shade tree. So as long as they do that, then I think that that would be consistent with your prior action. So there's a condition that you could apply that if they do clear, that they need to plant shade trees, and if not, it would be okay. They can let it go. As far as survey and legal, there's going to be a meets and bounds description, which could be a challenge based upon that, that definition over there, but they'll be able to provide you with that eventually. Also, there's a 50-foot right-of-way for Scunnamunk, which separates the parcel from the, I guess, is that the north and south? Pretty much north and south. That we've asked them to offer for dedication. It's a right-of-way that's used as Scunnamunk Road now, but it's not, it's owned by the applicant, I think, in fee. So that, when you get an application like this, you generally try to correct that and have that dedicated over. Whether it's accepted or not is a matter for the jurisdiction of the Board of Trustees and not this board, but you could require that they offer it. We talked about the stone walls, that should try to maintain those features. That's in your code. This does apply to ridge preservation, but there's a question in this that it's supposed to be on a photograph approved to the board's satisfaction if it's visible. And I think you've noted that it's not visible from any of the view corridors. And as long as that's demonstrated, I don't think there's any further requirement. It's up to the board, though. It's apparently not a waiver. It is just not necessary based upon what the code requires. And the applicant is asking for preliminary plat approval at this time. That's correct?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously want to get the final approval. I guess you have noted that in the review letter. You also have that public hearing. The secret has to be addressed as well. We want to move everything forward as well as we can within the guidelines of the code.
Well, the applicant can move it along to preliminary plat approval. I believe there's sufficient information subject to the comments that we made. However, to go to final plat approval, they will have to demonstrate they have water supply on the property, and that's an expense. And I think the applicant would like to know that they have approvable lots before they proceed to that expense. And that's typical, and you've done that in previous applications. And I think that's all I have. There was some question on wetlands in here. There's no buffer requirement for the Army Corps, if that's all these are.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so it may take away some property, but there should be sufficient room. There is a requirement for wetland application locally, so that'll have to be taken care of. We have a wetlands law, and we have a permit requirement for wetlands. And even if it's an Army Corps, it's still going to be a Village of Woodbury wetland.
Is that for disturbance?
That,
What would the permit be for that?
it's a regulated activity within the area and the 100-foot adjacent area. Are you in a 100-foot adjacent area? It wouldn't be for the Army Corps. The Army Corps has no adjacents. but our code has adjacent areas. If there's anything you're doing in the 100-foot adjacent area, then it would require a permit.
I don't believe we do, but I will check that. and I'll let
Okay.
you know, but I don't believe we have anything within 100 feet of the wetland.
Well, if that's the case, then I don't think you'd require anything here.
Thank you.
That's all I have, unless you have any questions.
Dennis, I have a question. What is a raised Elgin system in reference to?
It's a
septic?
manufacturer that makes certain package type of units that you use for absorption in a field. We used to use just pipes running down with the holes in the pipes going into stone. This is more of a package system that allows for good, even distribution and more efficient distribution of wastes into the groundwater or into the septic field.
So that would be just for 2 lots?
No, the only difference I had there, they're using Elgin for all the lots, but one was a shallow system, and I think maybe there was either a typo or maybe, I've just asked you to take a look at that, whether they're shallow systems or not. It's just a table.
It's shallow on 2 and 3, I think. And that was due to shallow bedrock.
Right, and I think one of the tables might have said Elgin for 2 of them and shallow for 1, and that was just a typo. So that's probably more than you want to know about septic systems.
No, I think I need to know that.
Yeah.
I don't have any comments.
Sandy?
I just have a quick question, because something I still don't understand. Dennis or Rick, on lot 2, that's the part that's in the village of Woodbury and the village of South Blooming Grove. Okay. I'm still confused as to how we can change anything or approve anything that is in 2 different municipalities.
I don't know that we are approving the lot subdivision in South Blooming Grove.
You wouldn't be approving.
Well, aren't these lines moving to become 1 lot? That's where I was confused the last time, and I'm still confused.
I think we just designated what the area is, but we're not actually adjusting anything that's in the village of South Blooming. The perimeter of the property, the only definition we have for the property is this. We don't know exactly where that line is. We can't mathematically define what those tax lots are, but they are on the tax map as separate lots.
And the role in common ownership?
I believe so, yes.
I'd like to see that they're all in common ownership.
Is there a
because-
lot line revision that can happen for those?
Sorry?
A lot line revision for that?
We're not changing those lot lines.
Or like there's a zoning definition revision sometimes to cover lots, right? Isn't there? Like so if if there's 2 different zones, if you have an R1 and a commercial zone, and your lot runs through half of it, you have to go to the ZBA maybe and get that adjusted to, is that?
I don't think so.
No?
In some instances, like in this one, actually, the zoning line does bisect certain sections. But typically, the zoning lines aren't defined by meets and bounds in the
Right.
village code, they're just drawn on a map. In this instance, the county, when they struck that line, generally followed the top of the mountain. Just drew it in such a way that it kind of nipped off the end of certain lots, maybe this one is probably some other ones along there. So, as I'm saying, the county surveyors, my understanding is that they're aware of those issues and they're working to resolve those.
Dave, the issue though, as far as the board is concerned, what they have the authority to modify lots, subdivisions within the village of Woodbury.
Yes.
There's an existing tax parcel line to be deleted that you've noted up there between tax lot 2041-3 and 2041-2.
Right, yeah.
That lot line is being deleted. That's, it's the line above that,
Yeah.
right there? Yeah. That they can delete, but they can only delete it in the village of Woodbury.
That's
You
what
can
I'm
only
saying.
authorize it to be deleted.
That's what I'm saying. I didn't understand how we could be deleting that if it's in another
No,
municipality.
you're not going to be doing that. You have to look at this subdivision as if it ended at the village line.
And we
that's
asked for the
understood?
areas to be given, so we're going to have all the areas, but lot number 2,
What did you say?
I was saying to the applicant, is that understood? Because he keeps saying you know, the boundary lines.
Yeah,
But,
the only thing that you can do is, if you approve a subdivision, is approve the area of that subdivision within the village.
okay, just so that we're clear on that.
In the case of the transit village, where a piece of the transit village is in Harriman, the applicant also submitted to Village of Harriman in an application to them. And I guess my question would be, have you talked to the other village about what you're doing here? Since a piece of it.
Do we need to notify them, Rick, that this is pending?
Well, they will receive GML 239-NN notice, which is a notice that is given for any public hearing, which is within 500 feet of the border of another municipality. So they will get special notice, and apart from publication notice, they'll get a direct notice from the building department here to the clerk of the Village of South Blue and Grove, saying there's going to be a public hearing on this date with respect to these properties.
Okay,
So if they want to show up and opine, they can talk about it there. And it certainly puts them on notice that there's a subdivision that's being considered for within the Village of Woodbury. You're not going to do anything outside of the Village of Woodbury.
okay,
And exclusive of the land in the village of South Bloomingdale, the land parcel and the holdings within the village of Woodbury are clearly a buildable lot, a full-size lot.
right.
And what I'm thinking is that there's adjacent property that's owned in the village of South Blooming Grove, if those lines hold, that are contiguous to and perhaps owned by the same person. And that's just, if they went away, this would still be a buildable lot, lot number 2.
Okay,
Now, what happens if the county surveyors come back and there's a big discrepancy with those lines?
Dave will have a significant problem on his hands, and he'll come back and report how he figured it out.
It depends on when that happens. So if it's after your approval, that's something that they're going to have to address with real property tax and the county clerk and try to figure out what to do with these lots.
But nothing in our approval would affect or circumvent the county if they change the lots or said
It doesn't
that.
circumvent them at all. If we find out before an approval, before a final approval and the plat is filed, if it happens before then, they're going to have to come back here and readjust things, if in fact you have more or less property in the Village of Woodbury. If it happens after that, it's going to be an issue with the county as to how to address that with the property owners.
Okay.
and the only other question that I had was, I know that you said that you had approached the Village of Woodbury, and you had no definitive answer, but that was like January of 2018. There's new board members on the village board. Have there been any further discussions since January of 18?
No, we, as I outlined in the letter, we had at least one meeting, maybe 2, that we had at the village board. We never actually asked for them to render a decision, but it was kind of clear that several of them expressed some significant concern with allowing us to connect to the water and sewer line. You know, they cited the potential growth-inducing impact of that occurring.
Okay,
We basically, at that point, rescinded the application and came to the planning board, not at the time knowing that we would need to get a waiver from the board, this board, for use of public well or private wells and septic systems. Our understanding was that our connection to the water and sewer was not available.
okay. Do we need anything from the village board in that regard, Rick, or no?
No, I don't think you need anything official. Dennis deals with the village all the time as the village engineer, deals with the water and sewer departments. And so Dennis will be able, with his own investigation, to be able to represent to you whether they have the ability to hook up to the village system or not.
Okay. That's all I have.
Any questions? You're good? Okay. Sika and GML2, all look like they went out in September of 2018. Do we have to reaffirm Sika or re-notify the GML 239?
A couple of things. With respect to seeker, you've already sent out a notice of intent and you typed the action. So at this meeting, it would be appropriate for you to assume lead agency for this seeker. We will then prepare for you an EAF Part 2, for you then to go ahead through that at a subsequent meeting to help you make your determination of significance. But right now, it would just be assuming lead agency under seeker.
And we don't have to re-notify the GML 239, right?
No.
Okay.
I have a couple of other things too, but
Yep.
I'll either wait until after you want me to do that or before.
Yeah, well, just the way we don't lose ourselves in the process. I make a motion that we just, we declare ourselves lead agency.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All okay.
Okay, back a year ago, we had requested that the LLC form be filled out, identifying the members of the LLC. That has not been done. That needs to be done.
There's a form outlining all of the officers or members of the LLC.
Well, it'd be members usually of the LLC, yes. You can get that form from the building department. It's actually a form that was required by the county, and the county asked that all planning boards in the county assist in getting that form filled out. It's also helpful to see, because you're saying the owners of this LLC, but it's really impossible for, say, board members or consultants to know whether or not there's any potential conflicts if we don't know about individual members. So it's essential for several reasons. So that needs to be filled out as soon as possible. Ridge preservation, typically what happens, as Dennis had referenced, if it's not likely that this, any structures on here will be seen from the ridge, from the view shed corridors, if it's not likely, then they're not going to be subject to the ridge preservation, right? Usually what happens, at least historically, is that you relied upon now NPV to tell you whether or not it is going to be likely to be visible from the view shed corridors. And I don't know if Jonathan's ready to do that now, or he can provide that to you at another time. But that's really the standard. If it's likely to be seen from the view shed corridors, then they need to go through ridge preservation. If not, then you don't need to go through the ridge preservation. The applicant, I believe, last time indicated that they were, I don't know, 3,000 feet away, and so therefore you didn't think that it would be. But really, the board needs the recommendation of NPV. And the last thing I have, that'll allow you to wait. No, the last thing I have is, obviously, if you believe you have enough information, you can schedule a public hearing.
John?
We weren't tasked with reviewing this submittal, so I don't have any information for you, but if you'd like for the next time this appears, we can look into that issue. If the applicant, if you could provide the NPV the information on the basis of which you say you're not visible, we can look into that issue and make a report on that.
Okay. We'll have the applicant get that information over to the applicant so he can review.
Yeah, I just don't know if they have any contact information.
I can give you my card. You guys could hear it.
Dave, Dennis showed me something in the file that appears to set forth the members of the LLC. Is that the LLC that's still the owner?
Yes.
Okay, then we do have it.
Okay, thank you.
So we don't need an LLC, the one we have.
The members, 3 members of owning at least 5% or having a 5% membership or more is Noah Weg, W-E-G, Aaron S. Weg, W-E-G, and Faiga, I apologize for pronunciation, F-A-Y-G-A,